Frank and Hilary, I don't want to misuse your time here this morning, so it's what, 2 minutes after 10. We can launch a little bit here. Frank is a senior partner with the county planning and development department, senior planner, and he's also been through the shoreline management update in 2019. So he is knowledgeable about that for any questions that we might want to have him field later on. And he also is instrumental in knowing what the updates are for the what's happened so far with the comprehensive plan. Also, we've had Hilary here before, Hilary McGowan, and she has she's one in the office that's been keeping track of the tree canopy. And of course, that's an important thing for this particular committee. And we wanted to make sure that she had a chance to have her voice heard today too, because we have a number of questions about that in the process of fighting for an urban tree canopy policy that we'd like to see happen. So without further ado, I would like to get started. Frank, you both are on the ability to screen share here, and I'm not sure, and Hilary too. So how is it that you want to start?
Well, I'll thank you very much for inviting us this morning to be here. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then I'll go through the presentation. And I'm not sure how you normally do it in terms of questions. I do want to make sure I get through my material because I know there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff in our presentation. So I'm probably going to try to go through and then stop at certain points and ask if there's any clarifying questions. And then when we get done, we can have a more thorough discussion.
That's good. Or if you'd like, we could put questions in the chat as they come to people, and then we can field them at the end so that people don't lose their train of thought about something if something arises for them. So please do that. And Julie, would you watch for the chat questions to make sure we cover them when we do them at the end? I'd appreciate that if you would. So is that okay?
Yeah,
and
that sounds.
And we'll wait. We'll wait to bombard you with questions and just take anything that needs clarification.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen then. And so you should see my PowerPoint up on the screen right now. So again, thank you very much for inviting us here this morning to speak to you on the 2024 update of Snohomish County's Growth Management Act Comprehensive Plan. And just a quick overview of what we're going to cover. So I'm going to go over the main components of our project and the timeline, and also the public participation process. And then I want to talk about the land use alternative. So I know people are interested to hear about if there's areas where we're thinking about expanding the urban growth area. So that will be one of the key parts of this presentation. And then I will stop sharing my screen and hand over the presentation to my colleague Hilary, and she will cover one of the other key parts of the 2024 update, which is the development of urban tree canopy policies. So now I know that the Shoreline Management Act is something that you've been all focusing on. We did finish the update of our shoreline management program in 2019. So it's not it's not a main part of the 2024 update, although there is the compliance review to make sure that the updates in the Shoreline Management Program and in the Growth Management Act are all internally consistent. So other than that, it's not really part of this update, but I do have some knowledge of the Shoreline Management Act, and I'm definitely interested in hearing your comments and feedback and questions, and to take that back to our division. I'll answer what I can. So first, I want to talk about kind of the overarching requirements of what the county is working on right now. So under the Growth Management Act, we are required every 10 years, and our deadline currently is in 2024, to review our Growth Management Act comprehensive plan. Number one, to plan to update the growth targets for population and employment, and to plan out the zoning and the infrastructure to be able to accommodate that growth for the next 20 years. So the current plan goes through 2035. The updated plan will go through 2044. At the same time, we're required to do what's called the compliance review and review our plan to make sure that it's still consistent with updates to the Growth Management Act, that it's consistent with the regional plan, the Vision 2050 that was adopted by Puget Sound Regional Council in 2020, the countywide planning policies that were updated last year and to be consistent with the Vision 2050, and also to make sure that our regulations are consistent with our policies. And again, the deadline for us to complete this is December 31st, 2024. So in terms of planning for growth, right now we're focusing in on planning for a change of roughly 300,000 people from 2020 to 2044. That is consistent with the Vision 2050 regional growth strategy, the strategy for the region, but it also has that target for Snohomish County as a whole. And it also guides how we think about the cities and the county, how we plan for that growth and where we plan for that growth. And so currently we're planning for 300,000 people. The county has adopted initial growth targets that plan for roughly 200,000 of that to go into cities and towns. So the county has to look at how to accommodate the additional 100,000 in the unincorporated part of the county. This graph on this slide shows how that Vision 2050 target fits within the Growth Management Act forecasts. So under the Growth Management Act, the Office of Financial Management releases 20-year forecasts. Every 5 years, they update that. So in 2017, they released forecasts. There's a high, a medium, and a low projection. The medium projection is considered the most likely projection. And you can see in this graph, the Vision 2050 is the blue line. The medium projection from OFM in 2017 is that gray line. So they're pretty close together. We're required to be within the high to low bookends. We're also planning to be consistent with the Vision 2050 as well. However, I should note that the next 5-year projections are going to be released by Office of Financial Management at the end of this year, December 2022. And those are the growth projections that we have to be consistent with under state law. It's going to be interesting to see how those projections come out, because a lot has changed from 2017 to now, with COVID in particular, changing the way people are looking at where they live, where they work, and the relationship between those, and whether they need to drive to work or whether they use their computers to work from home. So there's also been a lot that has changed in terms of the way that people are perceiving different parts of our country and where the economy is strong right now. So it's possible that the growth projections that come out from OFM will be different than what we were planning for under Vision 2050. It was adopted in 2020, but it was developed before COVID. So it's possible that we'll have to pivot. Snohomish County, for our Growth Management Act, at least as we are preparing to update our plan, we are using a strategy to try to make sure that we'll be prepared to adapt if there is a change to that growth forecast and still meet our schedule. It's something to keep in mind. It could be that it's still consistent with the Vision 2050, or it could be that we need to regroup with the region and rethink how that is distributed around the region. But we are trying to make sure that we can still stay on track to meet the deadline. This slide lists out the main components of our plan in our project. So as part of the update of the Growth Management Act plan, we are required to follow the State Environmental Policy Act review and prepare an environmental impact statement. So we are doing a full environmental impact statement. It requires us to do 3 different alternatives, which includes a no action alternative and also 2 action alternatives, and to look at how those would affect the growth in population and employment, and how that's distributed, and how the infrastructure would need to be planned, and what impacts there would be for the environment. So that would be the natural environment. It also means the environment for the people. We look at environmental justice, and I believe with this update, we'll be looking at climate change. I think that's a new part of the analysis that we'll be doing this time, and the impacts for social equity. So there's also a look at the impacts for infrastructure and what that means in terms of what kind of investments need to be made, and with the different alternatives, whether one alternative would require different investments than another alternative. In terms of the policy and future land use map review, I've kind of covered this. We'll be looking at the updates that came from GMA and from the Vision 2050 and how those were incorporated into the countywide planning policies. There's always some housekeeping, making typo corrections, that type of thing. We also did a review in 2019 of all of our existing policies and how those have been implemented or have not been implemented, and are incorporating the conclusions that came out of that review into the update. The County Council has set some policy priorities for us, including broadband access and the urban tree canopy policies. There will also be executive priorities, a review of our future land use map, which controls what the zoning is allowed, and the zoning controls what's allowed to be built where. So we'll be looking inside the urban growth area, but also at the possibility or the necessity to expand the urban growth area to create more urban land to accommodate growth. There's the compliance review to be consistent with the Growth Management Act and the Vision 2050 and the countywide planning policies. And then the review of the infrastructure elements, capital facilities and utilities, transportation and parks, to make sure that we can support the growth that we're planning for. We'll also be looking at 3 new elements. So these are not mandatory elements, but they're elements that we'll be incorporating. So that includes a climate change element, looking at climate resilience. We'll be also including a tribal coordination element. We're working with the tribes on development of that. And there's going to be a new sub-area plan that we're working on for the urban core. So this is the area that is around the future light rail stations that would be in the unincorporated area south of Everett, north of Linwood, roughly between I-5 and Highway 99. So at this point, I want to move on to talking about the timeline for the project. So in terms of the State Environmental Policy Act review, the environmental impact statement, we already started working on that. Last November, we had a 30-day comment period. I think it got extended a few days. But that was where we looked at what are going to be the 3 alternatives. So I mentioned the no action alternative and 2 action alternatives. And in November, we took comments from the public and from other agencies on the scope of those alternatives, which I'll cover later in this presentation. And so at this point, we're moving forward with we've contracted with consultants to help prepare the draft environmental impact statement that's going to be based on those alternatives. And we're doing the forecasting and the transportation modeling. And the environmental impact statement would also look at mitigation measures that go along with those alternatives. And that work is expected to continue through next year up till August. And the current schedule tentatively would have the draft environmental impact statement come out next September. And then there would be a comment period at that point on that. Also, right now, we've started working on the policy review and also the updates of our infrastructure elements and our future land use map and zoning. And next year, we'll be taking the work that has come out of that to the Planning Commission. Starting in March, we'll be doing, we expect to do monthly briefings to the Planning Commission to work through that. And then starting in September is when after the draft environmental impact statement has come out, we'll be having the briefing and the hearing, and then potentially a decision by the Planning Commission on a recommendation in November of 2023. And then the next step after that is for us as staff to take the recommendation from the Planning Commission, prepare that, and then transmit it to the County Council. And then it's basically their it's in their hands at that point, but tentatively we have charted out a schedule that would lead up to a decision point by the County Council in September of 2024. So that leaves a little bit of leeway if that's before the deadline, but it also takes into account that usually the County Council shifts over to working on budget related work in the fall. So this schedule would lead up to the potential that the County Council would be able to make a decision by September of 2024. So now I'm going to move into the public participation part of my presentation. So we are trying to be very proactive and do much more wide-reaching outreach for this 2024 update, definitely than we did for our last update, and maybe more consistent with some of our earlier plans when we first started working on GMA, but obviously with a different approach. It's adapted to having internet and also having doing a lot of our work during COVID. So we are using a variety of ways of doing outreach that are new and different than what we've done before, and hopefully will be more effective, especially in reaching out to communities that we didn't necessarily work as hard to reach out to in the past. So that includes youth, includes Black, Indigenous, people of color, people that don't speak English or don't speak English very well. So we're doing extra effort to reach out to on that, including publishing most of our materials in not only English, but also in Spanish and Korean, because those are the most common languages where people aren't able to read English. Also reaching out to LGBTQ+ communities and people with disabilities. To try to augment our outreach, especially to get out in the community after doing almost all Zoom and Teams outreach for a couple of years, starting in, I guess, June, but mainly in July, there was a series of pop-up events all through the county with where 2 or 3 of our division staff would be out to talk to people about what's going on. We tried to reach out to, or we tried to be in communities all through different parts of the county. This slide actually tallies up the locations of those by council district. So, for example, District 5 being the southeast part of the county, there was a lot of effort to be out in that part of the county. So we did make sure to visit Darrington. We did visit the southeast part of the county. We also did extra effort in the area around what I called the urban core. So the areas where there's going to be the light rail stations in the future, to make sure that we were doing outreach that was commensurate with the types of planning that we're doing for that area. And we also took advantage of events that were happening. So that part of that outreach continued into August, and we were at the Evergreen Fair, for example. And some of the themes that we heard, so this is from people, not necessarily all solicited. What we've heard from people is they're concerned about affordable housing. They want more parks, they want better transportation. People are also concerned about making sure that the agriculture economy in our county can continue, and also have a rural way of life. Improving the infrastructure, having a mix of uses in our urban neighborhoods. People are concerned about building communities that they feel their family and their children will be able to live in. And also public safety is a common theme that's, I think everybody's aware that that's become more of an issue during the last couple of years with COVID. A lot of things have changed and people are concerned about that. And continuing outreach, I want to mention that we'll be having comment periods, a series of comment periods on the actual policy amendments. So these are proposed policies that are still early in the development process before we get finalized and start briefing the Planning Commission on those. So there's a series of phases. The first phase will be in November, and that's when we expect to go out with the first parts, the first 3 elements of the plan, which cover population and employment growth, economic development, and interjurisdictional coordination. And then there's a series of other parts that will come out over the next several months. And again, this leads up to having a chance for the public to comment on all of those for at least 30 days before we go to Planning Commission, and before the Planning Commission will start deliberating at the between September and November of next year. And that's will be an opportunity for people to provide testimony at when it's at the Planning Commission on the proposals. And at this point, I'm going to talk about the land use alternatives. I'm going to try to make sure that I leave time also to hear from Hilary, and that we don't take up too much of your time. But I do want to focus on these land use alternatives because I think this is something that people are interested to hear about today. So we have 3 alternatives. Like I say, these the scopes have been already set based on the comments that we heard back from the public last November. And we're focusing on transforming these narratives into what that actually means in terms of a future land use map and the zoning, and then modeling that and how that will impact the infrastructure, and then also how it impacts the environment. So alternative 1 is we're required to do a no action alternative. So this is, what if we just keep our current plan, but it continues with 9 more years of growth out to 2044. This is also our lower growth alternative as we think strategically about how to plan around the possibility that there could be a different forecast. But the key thing to keep in mind here is essentially this is a plan that does not have enough capacity to accommodate all of the growth that we expect. it's a lower growth alternative for urban areas, but this is actually the high growth alternative for the rural area because it assumes that growth continues roughly how it has been recently, so that 8.5% of the county's population growth would occur outside of UGAs, whereas our action alternatives would be consistent with Vision 2050, so it would be roughly half of that amount of growth in the rural area. Alternative 2 is our medium growth alternative. So there's a focus on the high capacity transit communities. This is an alternative that's consistent with the growth that's in the Vision 2050 and in the adopted initial 2044 growth targets that were developed through Snohomish County Tomorrow and our council after the Vision 2050 was completed. In this alternative, a large share of the growth that's in the unincorporated area would be in that urban core area around the future planned light rail stations south of Everett, north of Linwood, and west of I-5. There would also be a review of the zoning throughout the existing urban growth area in the high capacity transit areas, which includes the bus rapid transit areas, to look at rezoning low density residential neighborhoods to medium density residential neighborhoods, if that is a neighborhood where that is could be supported. And this alternative may include some minor urban growth area adjustments as well. The rural area would accommodate less than 4.5% of the total county wide population growth target. And then alternative 3 is our higher growth alternative. Be very similar to alternative 2, except that this would include a study of all of the urban growth area expansion proposals that the county council has identified for us to study, either through the docket process where the public requested changes to the urban growth area, or to other changes to their zoning or policies, and also some county council initiated proposals as well. So there would be UGA expansion proposals studied here. That means that in addition to relying on multimodal transportation, there would also be the study of new road projects that would be necessary to serve those UGA expansion areas. I just wanted to show you this. This is the current adopted future land use map. This will also be the no action alternative for our environmental impact statement. And the colors here correspond to the different intensities of development. It guides the zoning. So the zoning corresponds to what's shown on the map as well in most cases. And so this is the no action alternative. This is the current adopted map. And so now I want to talk about the proposed urban growth area expansions and other map amendments that we'll be studying. So this is part of the PowerPoint. So I am assuming that after this meeting, me and Hilary will make sure that this PowerPoint, we'll email this to John so that this can be shared. And this includes links to all the actual motions, so you can see what's actually was approved by council for us to study. But it also has a map that shows the locations of those. And so if I click on here, it brings up this map that shows more detail about what's proposed. So I'm going to go through this map for you, cover the main points here for just a couple of minutes, and then I'll hand it over to Hilary to finish up the presentation. But so this map covers the whole county. You can see the existing UGA boundaries are shown in the magenta boundary line. And then the proposed map changes are shown with various colors. And then there's numbers that correspond to where you can look up what that is down here below. So let me cover just very quickly what's proposed here. So Darrington has requested, basically this is a UGA swap. So this area here is part of their existing urban growth area right now. They're proposing to have that removed, but to add in roughly a similar capacity area to the UGA, but at different places. So the area that's removed right now is, a lot of that is timberland. So even though it's in the urban growth area, it's managed timberland, also some tribal land. The area that's being proposed to be added actually includes overlapping existing sawmill use that is this would better represent what's already exists there with the Hampton Lumber Mill. Also a large area, this is actually parkland, White Horse Park. So that's what Darrington has requested, and we'll be studying that change as part of the plan update. In Marysville, there's a large area here proposed to be added. This is adjacent to the Cascade Industrial Center that is attracting a lot of development right now, especially for warehouse distribution type uses. So there is a proposal here that was submitted by the public to expand that area to add additional industrial capacity. In Lake Stevens, there's a number of kind of minor adjustments, but in various parts here around the city. So there's a docket proposal to add a small area, 3.5 acres of urban industrial adjacent to existing industrial land at the east part of the area. Here on the east side, there is a existing county property, former landfill site that's as well as some adjacent properties that are proposed to be added to the UGA. South of the Lake Stevens UGA, there is an existing commercial area. It's very similar to the existing commercial area that's just north of there inside the UGA. So the proposal there is to just expand the UGA to take in those existing commercial properties that extend outside the UGA. And then on the west side is to take an area of additional residential land. Some of this is actually already built at densities that would be similar to urban densities. So the proposal here is to bring those in. These are proposals that we will be studying. Again, it could be that the council chooses not to adopt those, but they could choose to adopt all of them, or they could choose to adopt some of them, or to even to do parts of those proposals as well. I'll go out here to Monroe, and then I'll zoom into the southwest part. So in Monroe, there's two proposals. One is a docket proposal, and the other is a city, council initiated proposal to expand the UGA for urban single family residential use. And then in the southwest part of the county, so in Malpe, there is, so this is the Malpe area here. There is a citizen initiated proposal for us to add 12 acres for urban industrial at the very south part of the Malpe UGA. And then there's the county council initiated proposal that would bring in some school district property. It would bring in the Carousel Ranch property. It's a future county park. It also would potentially bring in some commercial properties here at the intersection of State Route 9 and Malpe Road, and a technical correction where there's an overlapping property across the UGA. And then there is a few proposals here that are actually overlapping proposals that would expand the southwest urban growth area boundary. This is an area that's kind of coincides with the edge of the Little Bear Creek area. If you're familiar with studies that have been done related to Little Bear Creek watershed, these areas would expand the UGA eastward to include up to 790 acres for a variety, mainly residential uses, but also with some public institutional for existing school properties and some existing other public agency properties. And there are also overlapping proposals that are just small areas of this that would be studied to see what would be the impacts if only a part of that was brought in. So we're still figuring out exactly how to study the larger proposal as well as the overlapping smaller proposals. But this area 14 here is an area that would be just 300 acres of that for urban medium density residential east of the existing urban growth area. It would take that urban growth area boundary out to a utility corridor that's a fairly prominent corridor that runs all along this entire area with power lines and also a pipeline sharing a fairly wide easement at that area. So that would become the eastern boundary along most of this, also including a school property where there's the school that was recently opened is located at this location. There's also some proposals being studied within the existing UGA. So let me speak to that real quick. So this number 6 here, there's a proposal to redesignate and rezone a existing industrial property to urban center at this location along Bothell Everett Highway. And there is a proposal to change the code to allow higher density within multifamily developments along State Route 99. There's already an existing corridor where that's allowed, and this would expand that corridor. And there is also a proposal to expand the Woodway UGA, municipal urban growth area there. A large area just to take in their existing town boundaries that extend out to the county boundary in out here in the Sound, and also to take in the Deepwater Pier that's adjacent to their municipal urban growth area there. This black boundary shows that urban core sub area that I spoke of, where we're studying for higher intensity uses that are more consistent with light rail stations in the future. Light rails expected to be here around someplace around the intersection of I-5 and 164th, and up here around the intersection of I-5 and 128th, and also a provisional station over at Airport Road and Highway 99. Provisional meaning that it's less, it's not officially planned for, but there is a possibility that it would be added to Sound Transit's plan. And this brown area here shows the areas where we have been reviewing the mainly the single family zoning for the possibility of doing medium density zoning. So that means basically smaller lot, single family, and also townhouse. So that speaks to what some people call the missing middle housing that provides potentially more affordable homeownership opportunities for first-time home buyers, which is a big problem, has been a big problem the last few years in our county. And so I pretty much touched on everything that we're studying. And imagining that you may have questions on this, but at this point I want to stop sharing my screen and give Hilary a chance to talk about the urban tree canopy and also parks and open space. So I will stop sharing my screen here. And Hilary, take it away.
Yeah, it's just getting my screen there. Can everyone see that? I'm gonna assume yes. Okay. So thanks, Frank, for going over everything in such detail. So the urban tree canopy policy amendments right now are proposed to be within the natural environment elements. And that comment period is going to be February 1st through March 3rd. And currently in the stage that we're at in reviewing those policies is we're coordinating with other departments right now. So that includes DCNR and parks. And looking at the policy, seeing different strategies for how they could be implemented. What are some areas that we think we're looking at maybe we have some additional questions for. And so part of that is also working with a Department of Natural Resources as well as council staff during this review process. And we do have a meeting next week with Councilmember Dunn to talk more about these policies. And yeah. So for the next part, I'm going to be speaking for Carol Olfs, who is the senior planner, principal planner at Parks and Recreation. And she also is doing open space. So the Parks and Recreation element is going to be the final phase for review, May 1st through May 31st. And some of their policy focuses are open space conservation in urban areas, such as the Urban Core Sub-Area Plan, which Frank just mentioned. Also integrating the recommendations from the Vision 2050 Regional Open Space Plan, the overlapping conservation focused work throughout the entire comprehensive plan elements. They're looking at integrating a balanced approach between recreation and conservation, specifically in the more urban areas as well as looking at the regional trail plan updates. And so Carol asked me to show you some pictures of parks. These are likely going to be included in the comprehensive plan. So this is just kind of a little fun morning thing. Here's Forest Glen Park, Lord Hill, the Northwest Stream Center at McGowan Park. Here's the SR 530 Slide Memorial that's currently under construction. The Kayak Point Park, it's the planning for construction, so you can see some of the plan here. And here is her information, and again, we'll be sharing this PowerPoint with you so you can learn, or you can reach out to her if you have any specific parks questions. And that's the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you. Oh, Joan, I think you're muted.
I know I'm bursting with questions, and I'm sure that others are too. Hilary, I love looking at all those parks, but I have to drive to go to every single one of those parks. And I'm more interested in being able to enjoy nature that I can walk to and not have to get in my vehicle in order to be a part of it. And that's what I'd like to see our county government and our planners focusing on providing for population. Is there that element ongoing in the planning?
Yeah, so one of the policy focuses was looking at parks in the urban core sub-area plan, and that goes along with some equity mapping that Parks is doing and seeing what kind of populations have access to parks. And so that hits that issue that you just talked about of where can we have urban parks that more people can access. And so those policies that you'll be able to review are going to be really important as a part of that. And that equity mapping is still happening right now. So we're learning to understand what that might be, what our needs are, as well as other policies within the comprehensive plan that may be able to support that, such as additional funding may be needed to make that happen.
All right, there were a bunch of questions in the chat. So I'd like to kind of go back and catch up on those because I think many of them pertain to you, Frank. Your presentation, that was a loaded presentation, by the way, and thank you for taking the time to go through it. Let's see, Julie, you were on for that. So can you bring out some of those questions?
It'd be nice if we could just honor all the questions and run through them. The first one was, does shoreline use consider the effects of climate change, such as sea level rise?
Yeah, so definitely sea level rise is something that we'll be looking at with our comprehensive plan update. So there's definitely the concerns about increased flooding, for example, from sea level rise. And when we updated the shoreline management program, for example, it was updated to including the flood hazard regulations, but the flood maps, it takes a long time to update those flood maps. So I think that they're always a little bit behind the times. So with the 2024 update, we're definitely going to be looking at that and the impact for capital facilities and in the EIS. So that's part of examining the impacts from climate change and for climate change from for our comprehensive plan as part of the EIS. But that's definitely on our radar there, to look at the impacts from sea level rise as part of planning for the capital facilities, and also when we think about where it's appropriate for accommodating growth, like when we're looking at urban growth area boundary changes, for example.
Another question is, what are the key points that the public's asked to participate in the planning? I think that was shown on a couple of your slides, but are some of those points more important than others? I think Joan means are some of those chances to comment more important than others.
Yes, let's think about three key parts of the process. So over the next several months, we're going to be having our staff-led public comment periods on the policies. So that will be a point where we haven't finalized our proposals yet, and we can still adapt to the comments that we get. So that's over the next several months. I think leading up to next May, there's going to be those comment periods. So that's a key part if you want to be fully engaged and help us develop those proposals. Then the next phase is when it goes to Planning Commission. So right now, the expectation is that there would be a series of workshops for the Planning Commission, but then there's the point when there's the public process at the Planning Commission, in which also corresponds to when we expect the draft environmental impact statement to come out. So that's next September, October, and November. So that would be a period of time to review what's in the environmental impact statement and comment on that. That would be a time to review the land use alternatives and comment on what you think should be the preferred alternative for the map stuff that I was going through in the zoning. And that would also be an opportunity to provide testimony. If we have the hearing in October, that would be the point when the public can provide testimony to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission can hear that testimony as they put together their recommendation. Then the third part of the process will be when it actually goes to the County Council. So that's going to be the period, what our tentative schedule, it's tentative because the County Council controls the schedule at that point. But the expectation is that between March and then September of 2024 is when the County Council will be holding their briefings, and then they'll be holding hearings and making a decision. So that would be a point in time where there would be the opportunity to provide public comment to the County Council as they're making those decisions. First, they'll be deciding what the preferred alternative should be. And then that decides what the final impact statement will show as the preferred alternative, and then the County Council will take action. And our schedule shows in September, so the hearing could be in that later period of August to September period. But that's all tentative, so it's important that if you want to stay engaged in the process, to also make sure that you follow if there's changes to the schedule, and especially once it's at council and it's their prerogative, what happens at that point.
There are a couple of questions about that, about how the public is supposed to stay informed about the calendar and what when their chances are. My question was, I signed up to receive emails about the comprehensive plan update, and I've only received a couple in the last year, I think. And then Joan had a question about how far ahead the calendar is published so people know about these events.
So I just wanted to jump into that question a little bit first. So the emails, was it the newsletter that you received for those emails?
I signed up to be notified about, I think, all the comp plan things that involve the public.
Yeah, so those email updates is that we put them into newsletters and that we put all of that information into those newsletters. So it's not like a constant stream of emails that it's centralized in one place.
But
So
are they sent to the people who signed up? Or are they?
absolutely. Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
I'll sign
if
up
you,
again.
yeah. And I put the link to our comprehensive plan update webpage on there, and we're constantly updating this webpage. We recently just had another update where we streamlined a lot of it. And if you click on reports under the main bar in that page, you can find the summary of our pop-up tabling. So that kind of answers the questions about what did we hear from the tabling. And you can see where we visited and how often. And you can also see feedback from our visioning as well as early scoping from last year. So if you're curious to see kind of where we've been on that process, and then the main page will keep you updated as well on the project schedule and opportunities for additional public engagement.
There's a question.
Go ahead, Julie, but I wanted to ask Frank and Julie, Hilary, how does the public know that you've listened to them? You know, there's been a lot, sometimes I think the development community is really strong in getting their voices heard, and they're big stakeholders. And the general public doesn't appear, and oftentimes they're not in appearance in as great a number as the developers are, because they're not paid to be there, they're volunteering their time. And finding the time isn't always easy. So in what ways do you communicate back to the public that they've been heard, that their ideas, problems, and things that they've brought up in their messaging has actually been taken into account?
Sally had a question about that too, how public comments are weighted in considering what will be in the final draft.
Yeah. So when we do have comments that come from the public, and especially if they come during our public comment periods, normally there is going to be a report afterwards that identifies the comments that we heard. So for example, on our website right now, there's the scoping report that describes what we heard back from the public in the public comments during the scoping period on the 2024 update. Also, when we had to, we were taking comments on a vision statement that's to be included in the introduction to the comprehensive plan. And after we heard comments on that, then we published on our website a summary of what we heard from the public. So anytime that we have a period where we have taken comments from the public, we try to make sure that we document that and share back to the public what was heard. Ultimately, when it comes time for the planning commission, for the county council to make their decisions, we also communicate what we heard from the public to them so that they know what the public comments were. As far as how they're weighted, I mean, at the staff level, we try to take into account the feedback that we hear from the public. Now, ultimately, when it comes time for the planning commission or the council to make decisions, they're weighting things that the way that is important from their perspective. But there is a goal to weight the public comment feedback. I equally, but also considering the social equity. So there's a importance to also consider voices that haven't been heard as loudly in the past. To your point, developers, obviously they know the process, and they're organized. So they work hard to have their voices heard. And so we do have a responsibility during this update for us to do the extra work to make sure we hear other voices as well.
There's,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just wondering if Hilary had anything, because she's involved with a lot of the public participation.
Yeah, so that, your question about how can we ensure that the public sees that their comments are actually being part of our planning process. And that's been a huge part of why we have these reports, why we've been doing so much tabling and reaching out to people, and also why we have the newsletters now. And so these are all pretty much new things for the comprehensive plan that we've done this time that hasn't been done in the past. And that's because we want to make sure that voices are being heard, particularly from people who haven't had a chance yet to have their voices being heard. And so all of those reports that we're getting back show evidence that we are including them in our planning process, that they are a part of the consideration. And as we're doing policy review, we even bring in, hey, we heard these general themes from the public. These are things that we want to hear from. And so that's how, on a real level, that public comment is influencing policy review and policy making.
Ron had a comment and a question. It says, seems like we'll see policy amendments before we see any of the new data or information that's first needed to develop these. Seems like the cart is ahead of the cart. When will we see the actual work plans for what new analysis and data will be collected?
Yeah, so it's definitely an iterative process, because we need to have something to study before we can see what the impacts will be. But we need to know what the impact can be before we can make a decision. So the process that we're at right now is to have kind of those starting point discussions. So as far as like the zoning, that started with the scoping process. And then with the policy amendments, the idea there is that those will be, complementary to the land use alternatives. But then the environmental impact statement is based on those, initial proposals from the docket and from the amendments. But the environmental impact statement will also look at what is important to mitigate the negative impacts that would be resulting. So that is a point where that information is taken into account after we've already looked at what those different alternatives are and what the possible range of policy amendments are. And then the Planning Commission has that information from the environmental impact statement and from the proposals and from our briefings to them and from public testimony. They make a recommendation. So at that point is when it starts getting narrowed down. So it's like we're starting by creating a broader range possibility. Somebody asked the question and then we kind of skipped over what goes into the alternatives. The idea with the alternatives is to be realistic about what's possible to be adopted, but also a wide enough range to accommodate the possibilities. And then when we have studied the impacts from those, that allows us to then start narrowing into what a preferred alternative should be. And then that's when the county council gets to make that decision, and they will have the draft environmental impact statement. And then when they narrow in, there's a final environmental impact statement that makes sure that the exact proposal is addressed before they actually make their decision on the 2024 update comprehensive plan.
Then Kate's question about the UGAs, is there not usable land within the UGAs before we try to justify expanding the UGAs?
Yeah, so our countywide planning policies require us to do a full study of possible ways to accommodate as much of the growth or potentially all of it within the existing urban growth area before we consider UGA expansions. So that is part of the reason why we are studying accommodating as much of the growth as possible around the future light rail stations, and then beyond that, creating opportunities for more ownership housing in existing single-family neighborhoods that are in the UGA. So that is definitely a focus of the work that we're doing and the proposals that will be going forward. Separately, there have been requests from the public and ideas that the council has for expanding the urban growth areas. So we will be studying those, but there's definitely the possibility that a lot of the growth can be accommodated within the existing urban growth areas. So just as an example, based on some of the draft work that we're doing with the urban core sub area, potentially that urban core sub area could be I mentioned that we're planning for roughly 100,000 growth in the unincorporated county. So potentially up to as much as a half of that could be accommodated just around the future light rail stations.
She also asked how the county could help identify priority habitat corridors in the unincorporated urban growth area, and if there are mechanisms and funding to do that.
And I know that was Hilary. Do you have any information on that?
I was going to say that sounds like a Hilary question.
Yeah, so I can't speak to all of the details on that just because I'm not the one particularly working on Parks and Recreation, but part of that is looking at the regional open space plan as well as looking at that conservation focus work. And so that is looking at the wildlife corridors. And I do know that the Parks and Recreation element is at the end of the comment period when the policies will be able to be reviewed. But those exact questions that you're asking are being considered into the Parks and Recreation element, particularly thinking about how those wildlife corridors are part of urban areas as well. And so those are some of the policies that they're looking at being able to integrate and seeing what resources we have to ensure that.
I just follow up on that because I did want to ask, I think open space planning generally restricts itself to public property. And I'm asking about how can we protect habitat corridors, significant habitat corridors that may cross private property. Thanks.
So I don't think I have enough information to talk about wildlife corridors preserved, particularly in private property. I know that's a pretty complicated question in terms of, is this a new development? Are these policies that are already in existence of conserving that or not? So I will definitely pass that question along to Carol or comment and let her know that that's something that folks are thinking about. Sorry, I see plane going by. But yeah, that's a great point, and I'll make sure that Carol hears about it.
Okay, the next question is mine. It's about your new element of tribal coordination and how that's going to work. In our neighborhood, the Snohomish tribe has turned a bunch of land into tribal trust lands, saying they were going to use it for housing, which would be within the zoning the county has placed on our area. But then they've done things like casinos, hotels, gas stations, and now pot shop, hotel. So is part of that tribal coordination, are you going to try to work with them to see if they can refine their plan to stay within the zoning? I know they're a separate nation, but you know, it had a huge impact on our neighborhood and the wildlife corridors because a lot of the land has been cleared.
I think the tribal element, so I don't know all the details, but it is about coordinating. I'm not sure to the extent that there'd be any effort on our part to try to get the tribes to go along with our plans for those areas after it becomes tribal lands. I think it's more about us coordinating with them on their plans, but
well, what exactly does that mean? The county coordinating with them on their plans. That's what our neighborhood's having trouble understanding.
Yeah, like you say, they are separate sovereign nations. So I wouldn't expect that there would be much in terms of them trying to be consistent with our plan. I think it's more of making sure that we are coordinating and aware of what each other's planning, because obviously there are impacts mutually by what happens on each other's land. I don't have a lot more to say on that. I'm not directly involved with it, but I just know from my background related to tribal issues is that they
Frank, you're off the hook. You're off the hook. Dealing with the tribes is
there somebody-
complicated
is there-
because they are a sovereign nation, and not any of us fully understand it. And maybe that's something we need to look at in the future, just to focus on as a committee to understand it more clearly.
Could you point me to somebody, Frank, that would be able to tell me about that element a bit more?
Is there someone that coordinates
Well,
more in your
our
office?
our manager David Killingstead is working on that, but I just, based on my knowledge, like I say, it's this would be a conversation of if they want to do something consistent with us. It's up to them.
Okay, let's go on. Ron said that, I think this is in terms of your first time ownership of homes, the areas you were designating for houses that people could afford. More density does not equal affordability. Ron, do you want to say anything about that?
I was just, that's all I hear is we've got to increase density because everyone wants affordable housing, but there's been a number of studies that show that there's not a direct correlation. It's really what the developers want to build if they can increase density. If there isn't something from the funding side or the subsidy side, more density doesn't equal affordability. It's just kind of a soundbite that makes everyone feel good. And I think that has to be explored a lot more. There was a good column, I think yesterday or the day before, about that in the Seattle Times. That's all. Just a point. All we're hearing here in Edmonds and every place else is affordable housing. It's a worthy goal. But what I've seen happening in Seattle is there's endless canyons of condos and townhouses, but I don't hear anything about them being more affordable. Everyone's still complaining about affordability. So
Yeah, and point taken. So I think it's a matter of more opportunities. When we're talking about ownership housing, we're talking about relative. Affordable to who? We're not talking about affordable to everybody. There's different approaches to affordability for different segments, and that's something I didn't make a big point about that today, but that's actually a big part of what we're having to update our comp plan, just based on brand new state law that came in this year, House Bill 1220, that requires us to plan for income bands. And so, yeah, more density for single family attached. If it's that the house is smaller, so it's a little bit more affordable than a larger house. But also you can have apartments and skyscrapers that are more expensive than a house. So density alone does not equal affordability. But what we're trying to do is make more houses, because right now there's not enough. And so the prices are skyrocketing. So it is a relative thing, but other approaches have to go hand in hand and are probably more important when you start looking at how to house homeless and how to house people that are lower income, very low income people who either are just getting started in life, or maybe are not going to be homeowners in the future. And so there's different options that are required. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we're creating more houses for more people so that we don't have the skyrocketing prices. Otherwise, we should just expect skyrocketing prices. So that's kind of the other option.
Yeah, and I wanted to jump in there as well. And we've got the HO5 report that'll be coming out. I don't know the exact date that it'll be released, but it's currently being worked on. And part of that is looking at housing needs and looking at what kind of income levels and what's all needed for that. So like Frank said, it's not just about density, it's about ensuring that the density includes housing for all. And just kind of on a personal level, the people that are working on it, I'm not a homeowner, I know other people aren't, and so we too are seeing the evidence of, you know, the high cost of housing and everything. So including looking at state law and local levels, we're all part of trying to find a solution.
There's just two questions left, and they're both from Gail. How does the plan provide for walking corridors? Developments fence in their developments, creating barriers to people walking to get places as opposed to driving?
Hilary, do you want to respond to that one? I can take the last question after that.
Yeah, sure. So I think that this is also kind of ties into Kate's question about the difference between public-private with wildlife corridors and being able to walk through. So I do know that this question is being considered for both transportation element as well as parks and recreation, and looking at what possible strategies are for that. I can't speak into knowing exactly what those strategies are or where they are in the conversations, but I do know I've been in a part of meetings where that has been part of it. There, I mean, of course, we have just restrictions on we can't force many private property owners to be able to allow access. Usually that's something that if we had a policy for, that could be planned for in the future of developments, but it's definitely a balancing act for those.
And then the last one, do the growth projections take into account that Washington will be a destination for climate refugees?
Yeah, so this is definitely something that we've talked about among our staff. I don't think that the Vision 2050 explicitly took that into account. I don't think it's described extensively in the Vision 2050, but when they do the regional forecast, they do take into account what are the forces in other parts of our country that would be affecting, migration around the United States from other parts of the country. And as OFM is looking to update their growth projections, and those are due at the end of December, it will be interesting to see how they have considered the possibility of climate refugees from California, but also maybe from Arizona, Texas, coming north to Washington. And the reason I say that it's interesting because in the past, like say for the last 50 years, the way that people have generally modeled migration around the country is more about where jobs are available or where jobs are not available. So it's like the economy affects where people go. And so on the East Coast or in the Rust Belt, there weren't enough jobs, so people left and they came west. Now in this situation, potentially there could be jobs that go unfilled because people are leaving and they don't want to be in those communities. So it's a new effect that simple, macroeconomic models that were developed in the 20th century aren't necessarily designed to look at that kind of situation where people will leave their jobs and go someplace else where there may not even be enough jobs, but they don't want to be in that place anymore. So it's like the places with the lowest unemployment could be those places because people are leaving, and places with high unemployment are the places where they're attracted to. So it's the opposite relationship of what we've always used for macroeconomic models in the past. Now, keeping in mind the people that do the demographic forecasts in Washington State now are pretty good at what they do. They have practice and expertise and the specialty. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with to take into account climate change, and also to take into account the changes that we've seen in employment patterns and commuting patterns in the last couple of years. But it's going to be very interesting to see what those new Growth Management Act forecasts look like.
Is there a way that we can find out what they tell you in December, Frank, about that off? That was one of my questions is I anticipate bigger numbers myself, especially since what COVID proved is a lot of people can work from home anymore. They don't need to be tied to their offices necessarily. And so that gives them the option of moving to a more desirable environment for working. And many of them did during that time. So
they will be published on Office of Financial Management website when they come out. That's how I'll be figuring out. I'll probably get an email, but I'll be also checking their website daily in December, just because demographics is my thing. So I'll be looking to see when the moment those forecasts come out. I'll probably be racing with one of my coworkers to see who finds out first. But yeah, so that'll be the number one thing. At some point, we'll probably do an update on our website, but very first place to find those would be on the Office of Financial Management. You could just Google Office of Financial Management Growth Management Forecast.
I was very pleased, and I think many of you will concur on this, to see elements like the climate change being entered into the planning. And those are new words, new terminology. They're not new, but as far as the planning department is concerned, those have been new terms. And I was excited. I'm very excited to hear that. And the urban tree canopy policy is under consideration and being worked on. I am thrilled. I mean, these are major shifts in our Snohomish County Planning Department, and I am excited to see it. I want to open this up for the last question, because I know Frank, you and Hilary have office work to do, and being here though has been amazingly enlightening for all of us. And I really am curious about seeing those alternatives. One of the things I want to mention, because my eyes are getting weaker as I get older, is I hope the maps that you use when you have your meetings will be the enlarged print editions or in some way where people can press on them and enlarge them so that they can see their particular neighborhoods and what's going on, because very often that's what really hits home with people. Oh, this is what's going to change the way I get to work. This is what's going to change the way that I get around my neighborhood. This is what's going to change for me. And you can't always see that when the print is minuscule on these various things. And I know the maps at the county level on the computer have that capacity to zoom in and zoom out, but not always when you have your actual staff meeting in front of the public. So anyway, that said, I just as a side. So do we have one more question here for our guest? Linda, I know this has been long. Gail, you want to unmute and ask your question here?
As we make neighborhoods more dense, to me, as a retired teacher, I really think about the children and the types of environments they're in. It's not necessarily parks that they have to have, but they need places where they can safely play. And, I don't see that happening in all the developments that I've observed. And so how's that being taken into consideration?
So I think for the urban core sub area, that is something that we're looking at. Hilary, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so part of that question connects to the other ones that talked about today. about parks and open space and those connectivity. And what you mentioned goes into equity, and that's a huge component of what we're looking at in terms of our plans and proposing possible areas for future parks, as well as coordinating with other agencies such as Sound Transit, because all of that connects to where are people going, where are they going to be, what are their ability to recreate around their house. And so that question kind of tags along to what we're doing in terms of policy work and land use. For the urban core sub-area plan, I'm particularly looking at climate change, natural environment, and parks and open space. And we all work together for the sub-area plan, and we have like weekly meetings where we're talking about it. And so that is something that is going through the conversations in terms of policy making and looking at potentials to ensure that there is equity in terms of what kids can play where.
We'd like to thank you, David, not David, but I'd like to thank David for referring you to us, Frank and Hilary. And he couldn't be here because of another meeting. He's been here quite frequently to talk to us. And I think maybe we should get him back again at some point in the future. For sure, but you have filled us in on a tremendous amount and given us the big picture, and we truly appreciate it. And then we know that answering the questions that we can throw at you can take a little bit of add a little bit of stress to your days, but it also informs you a little bit about the concerns that are going on around you, about the expansions and the changes that are being brought by the population pressures and the growth that we've experienced here in our county, and by the effect of climate change. You know, that smoke settling in here has us all thinking very much about the future and what we want it to be, and we want it to be healthy and healthy for all of us. So thank you again. You don't have to hang around. We do have other things to get to in our meeting, and it's up to you. If you want to hang in here, you're welcome for the rest of our agenda.